Jason Fitzgerald. Welcome to Pennsylvania Now. We've taken a bit of a break on Pennsylvania Now here for the last couple of months, but I promised that we would come back when time allowed, and we certainly are very thankful for all of the people who tune into this podcast and all the sponsors who we'll be mentioning later. And today, for the Christmas edition of Pennsylvania Now, we have somebody who North Central Pennsylvania referred to as the Judge of Hope. We have Judge Marc Lovecchio, retired judge, recently retired Judge Marc Lovecchio with us. Judge, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as folks know who tune into this show, I try to balance between, oftentimes I'm talking about controversial issues in the region and that kind of thing that aren't always comfortable. But today for Christmas time, I wanted to have an opportunity to talk about some positive things. And one of the people who I believe who has had a very positive impact on our community. And we're going to ask him some questions, and you can decide whether or not you agree with me on that. But the Lovecchio family in Lycoming County, whether it's the judge or his brother, Chris, who's a prominent lawyer in town, certainly have impacted the community through their positions, but using those positions, in my opinion, to do good for people. And as we talk about a lot on this show, sometimes doing good for people is simply being nice to them, having conversations with them, reaching out to friends. And that's one of the things that I hope has always been a theme of this. It will never get us the highest ratings, but at least I'll be happy doing it. So without any further ado, we have the man who North Central Pennsylvania referred to as the Judge of Hope, the Honorable, now retired, Judge Marc Lovecchio. Judge, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Really appreciate you taking the time to come on to the show today. And what I want to do is for our audience, who many of whom know you, but may not know a lot about you, I'd like you to talk about where you came from. So, where you were born, your parents, what it was like growing up in the Lovecchio household.
Sure. Born in the Philadelphia area. My dad was a doctor. Well, he was in medical school at the time. I had an older brother, so he was struggling financially. He joined the Navy. He was a doctor in the Navy. We moved around. We were in Bermuda for a while, interestingly. Then we ended up back in the South Jersey area and then moved up to the Pocono Mountains, East Stroudsburg. That's where I went to high school. After high school, I went to Princeton. After Princeton, I worked for about a year. Actually, I traveled a little bit in Europe with no money, sleeping in hostels and in parks and stuff like that. And then I came back and I worked in California for a while. I worked in Iowa. I worked in East Stroudsburg, in the Pocono Mountains, all sorts of different jobs. Went to law school at University of Pittsburgh. That's where I met my wife, who's from this area. And after we graduated from law school, we both had jobs in Pittsburgh, but ended up moving back to this area in about 87 or 88 when my father-in-law had gotten ill. We obviously raised our family here. We have 3 children, all adults at this time. I went into practice with my father-in-law and brother-in-law at the time. Fortunately or unfortunately, I look at it fortunately, we were here for about 5 years before both her parents passed away. And that was 5 years we never would have had with them. So that was a nice thing. We came back for personal reasons and haven't looked back.
So you practiced law for a while, and by the way, they say that if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Williamsport is an old town, and I know personally it can be very difficult, and my family's been here for, actually on the Bailey side, we've had somebody who's fought in every war since the Revolution. Wow. And on the Union side, by the way, during the Civil War. And sometimes I still feel like a newcomer. So how were you able to ingratiate yourself into the Williamsport area? It probably didn't hurt that you were Italian and Catholic, but still a new Italian and Catholic. So how did you do that? How did you make it here?
Well, it's interesting because when I was leaving Pittsburgh, I went in and told one of the partners at the firm and said, I'm going to move to Williamsport. And he basically said, well, what the hell are you going to do there? And I said, I don't know. And I'll never forget, I was here for about a week. I didn't have an office. My father-in-law and brother-in-law had their office, but they didn't have an office for me. So I was sitting in their library, trying to do a type of practice that I had never done, with really no clients, not a whole lot of work. And I remember riding my bike to the top of Blooming Grove Road and looking around saying, boy, this is a beautiful place, but what the heck did I do?
Right.
It helped with my wife has a lot of family here. That helped just to meet people. But you know, it's a very provincial area. It's a very traditional area. And people who don't know you, it's hard to break in, so to speak. But I think what helped me in particular, and I credit Judge Raup and Vic Engel for this. Vic was a teacher at Bishop Neumann at the time. He eventually built Balls Mills soccer facility. And Judge Raup, they asked me if I would get involved in soccer in the area. And Judge Raup had gone to Columbia. He knew I played soccer at Princeton, and he had a son who was a junior or senior at the time who was looking to go to Brown and play soccer. And so I got involved with coaching through Bishop Neumann, and then I got involved in club soccer and youth soccer. That led to my name getting out as an attorney, so I started doing gang prevention type things. I started doing mentoring type things. I started doing a lot of drug and alcohol type things in the community, mostly with kids of high school age, and that was my in, so to speak. That was the medium that I used to get in. And then the people are wonderful. I mean, people took me in and were nice people. It's an interesting area. Like I said, it's traditional, it's provincial, but they care about the same things that we all care about everywhere: kids and problems.
The people are fundamentally good.
Yes.
Particularly the people that are that I always talk to, which are the people who are the day-to-day folks out there making this area run. I've had my issues from time to time with some of the leadership, but I think that's getting better too. So 12 years ago, you made the decision to run for judge as obviously somebody who was relatively new to the area. And why did you make that decision to go from what you had a very successful practice, as I recall, at that time, and would have continued to? Why did you decide to seek the position of judge in a very competitive election year, by the way?
Yeah, that's a good question. The judicial vacancies that came up before that, one was Judge Anderson, I think one was Judge Gray, and I had actually been a part of discussions with some other attorneys while those two had run. I remember Skip Greavy ran, and we had met on certain times to discuss who might be interested in running and whatnot. And I wasn't sure whether the timing was right for me, but the timing was pretty good. I was in my early 50s, right around 50. There were going to be at least one slot open. I wasn't sure. I didn't know there were going to be two slots open. And it was, for me, a natural transition from what I was doing to trying to take the next step to help address some of the systemic problems that I saw in our criminal justice system, involving the poor, involving the mentally ill, involving drug and alcohol, involving, quite candidly, the treatment of those charged with criminal offenses. I mean, the reality is this: the whole judicial system for decades was lagged behind society in terms of treating those individuals. It still does to some extent. And I knew that if I ran for judge and became a judge, that I would have a couple things: a greater say, I could do things, and as a judge, people would have to listen. Not necessarily do what I said, but listen to my viewpoint, and I could bring people to the area. I mean, to the table, so to speak. Judge Lovecchio wants to see you, and you to talk about this issue. So I knew I would have a greater impact, and I knew, at least on the grassroots level, I could help people.
And you make a good point. I have evolved on these issues. You haven't. You've remained consistent on them, which I respect. And that is that the criminal justice system needs some reforming. And of course, while you served on the bench, you weren't able to make a lot of comments, and we'll get to that later. But one of the things that was impressive was that you kept your commitment, and that you always served in a way that I felt gave everybody dignity who came in front of you. Can you talk about being a judge, what it's like to have to look somebody in the eye and sentence them possibly to a life sentence? So it changes their life. What is that? Is it difficult to make that decision? How do you make that decision?
It's difficult in some ways. What makes it difficult is the humanity of the process. In other words, you're dealing with human beings. You're dealing with human beings, many, if not most, who are injured and fractured human beings. Many, if not most, who have come from long dysfunctional relationships, a culture of dysfunction. Many who have mental health issues, many who have substance abuse issues, many who have trauma-related issues. And as you said, when you sentence somebody, those years mean something. They're just not numbers. And if you sentence somebody to life, and I have on many occasions, it is sad and depressing on a human level. But on the other hand, I really took to heart my job as a judge in terms of protecting the community, reflecting the harm on the victim, and balancing that. If anything, because I did the vast majority of criminal cases, or it's the vast majority of what I did, I really took time to think about my sentences, to prepare for my sentences, to read everything that was given to me, and to listen at the sentencing hearings. So while I might have been sad from a human standpoint, the other side of the coin was I knew I had prepared. I knew I had done my job in terms of making sure that I would give a fair sentence under the law. And then I also would never forget the other side of the coin. Here's the reality, and I can say this now. There are some people who belong in jail for a long, long time, either because they're evil, either because they're mentally ill and can never change, either because they've been given all sorts of opportunities but won't change or can't change. And on the other side, there's people who are in jail who shouldn't be in jail. We waste a lot of time, energy, and resources of just warehousing people in jail. And while I was on the bench, I tried to kind of sort that out. And there were some times where I would have given out, I think I still might have had the longest sentence in Lycoming County's history. I don't know. I mean, other than life sentences, of course. But there's other times where I completely went the other way and said, no, this doesn't make any sense. And I would give somebody what some might consider a far more lenient sentence. But that was the thing. You couldn't look at me and say he fits in this hole or he fits in that hole. And that's what was important to me too. everybody deserved an individualized sentence.
And Judge, and we're going to talk about your time now that you've retired and what you're focused on, but one of the things that was always noteworthy, and oftentimes North Central Pennsylvania had, towards the end of your tenure would point this out a lot. One of the things that you did that was different than a lot of judges is you would take the time, oftentimes prior to sentencing, to share a message with folks. Oftentimes it was related to drug addiction, mental health, other things. What if you had a chance, and you did this on a number of occasions, but if you had a chance to provide advice to a young person who's in front of you, who, let's say, may have gotten themselves into drugs, et cetera, but essentially what I refer to as a victimless crime. They're in front of you for drug possession or that kind of thing. What would you say to that person? Or obviously probably dependent on what the particular situation is, but what is your message for those young people who now find themselves caught up in addiction and drugs and others, on how their life can go from here?
Well, many times I thought it was very important to connect with that person on a human level, and to try and at least say something that person could take away that might change how they were or how they would respond going forward. Sometimes that got me in trouble. Sometimes I would say things just to connect that the Judicial Conduct Board, for example, would say, well, that was a little. One time, for example, there was a gentleman who had 6 or 7 DUIs. He had hit an Amish buggy and almost killed some people. And I was sentencing him, and he was in front of me, and he basically was saying to me, I don't have a problem with drinking. Clearly, he had no clue as to his drinking problem. And it was clear to me that the second he got out of jail, he was going to drink again. So I'm thinking to myself, how do I shock him into the reality of changing? So I said something along the lines of, look, here's unfortunately where you are. You're 50-some years old, you've had 70 DUIs, 6 DUIs, you've been in and out of state prison. You need to do us a favor. Clearly you want to continue drinking, and clearly you're going to drink yourself to death. So when you get out of prison, go buy a home in the woods somewhere, and if you want to drink yourself to death, you can drink yourself to death there and not hurt the rest of us. That may have crossed the line coming from a judge, because
but it's good practical advice,
well,
right?
It was, but sometimes I forgot that we have the dignity of being on the bench, and you have to be, I called it righteous indignance on my part, but reasonable people disagree. But on the other side of the coin, there were many people, and first of all, I had to humanize them. I had to let them know that what they did wasn't them. In other words, it doesn't define who you are. Yes, you've made these mistakes, and yes, you have to be accountable for them, and yes, we have to protect the community. But you always have an opportunity to change. And I would give them examples of how people change, or give them examples of what people can do. And I'd always stress education. I'd always stress employment. I'd always stress that I'd find something good about them. And I'd say, you seem like a smart young man, or you seem like you've gone through a lot in your marriage, in this or in that, and you've survived, so you can survive this as well. The message was always one of hope, because I think what keeps people coming back again and again and again are either life circumstances and this lack of hope, this lack of opportunities. A real sad situation one time as I was talking to a gentleman, had to be late 20s, and I started to talk to him, and he goes, Judge, you don't have to say anything. And I said, why? He goes, look at me. He goes, look at me. He goes, number one, I'm black. Number 2, I have tattoos over my entire body. Uh, People just look at me and are, turned off. Number 3, I've been in jail since I was 17 years old. Number 4, I have no education. Number 5, I've got no skills. He goes, the second I get out of prison, I'm going to go back to slinging drugs. And hopefully it'll be longer before I get caught. But I appreciate what you're trying to tell me, but I have absolutely no hope and no chance. This is all I know. And I said to him, I'm really sad you feel that way. Mm-hmm. Do I agree with you? No. Do I understand why you feel that way? I said, yes, I do understand. Do I necessarily agree with you? No. But I would be an idiot to tell you that those aren't obstacles you have to overcome. See, many times we pretend. Many times in the judicial system, they pretended. They pretended like your criminal record doesn't prevent you from getting a job. That's nonsense. Mm-hmm. They pretend that the color of your skin doesn't prevent you from getting a job. That's nonsense. They pretend, they think you're going to go into jail and be rehabilitated. You're going to go to jail and all of a sudden you're going to come out, okay, so I'm going to do different now, with no job, no training, no education, and a felony on your record. So I tried to give them this message of hope and give them a message of, you can do this. Other people have done this. And you don't have to, I told people, I can't tell you how many times, you don't have to come back and see me in 5 years. You don't have to come see me in 7 years. There was always this other element too that I felt I needed to do to protect the community, which was, but you need to understand, young man, say if I was talking to you or young lady, that if you keep coming back, if you make the choices that you're making, you leave me no choice. And I never once pretended in them. Because they would say, well, that's not going to do any good. All I'm doing is being warehoused. And I never lied to them. I said, you're correct. You are being warehoused. But that's because you can't change and you're continuing to hurt others and yourself. So I'm warehousing you there.
We want to talk a little bit about some potential reforms, et cetera, now that you're able to do that. We're getting to the fun part of the show. I want to recognize our sponsors, and I also want to recognize Phoebe Ferrier and the great gang here who's producing this show. Really appreciate them coming in and doing this. But the Clothier in downtown Williamsport, Francis and Karen, been longtime friends of this program and of mine, and I actually have a suit from the Clothier on right now. And it's not just men's suits. It's slacks. It's casual wear. If you're watching this before Christmas, you can still get down there today and get a gift for Dad. There are gift certificates available. The guy has the largest stock of any men's clothing store that I can think of on the East Coast, possibly even in the United States. Every size, anything that you could possibly imagine, you can find at the Clothier in downtown Williamsport. Check it out, and when you go down there, let Fran and Karen know that I sent you, and they will have a special gift for you. So, Judge, we had to take a little break there to, we don't do this.
I think I have a Clothier, I do. I have a Clothier suit myself.
The judge is wearing a Clothier suit himself. We didn't plan that. And our guest, as we had indicated earlier, is now retired Judge Marc Lovecchio, the judge who was called the Judge of Hope by this publication. So this gave me a good excuse to talk about issues and make it hopeful for Christmas time. So Judge, you left what most people in this county and in other counties would call a pretty good gig. You were judge, you could have stayed there for the rest of your life had you chosen to, and you had served for 12 years, and you decided in a move that shocked a lot of observers in the community to retire this year. Judge, why did you decide to retire from the bench?
I've been asked that question a lot. It gets difficult after a period of time dealing with issues that that I guess the best way to say it is that continue from a systemic standpoint and that you really can't change. So from a professional standpoint, it became more difficult and more difficult to try to address these issues. Even though I was very active, I was set to be the president of the State Association of Judges. I was very active both nationally and throughout the state in judicial matters, judicial education, things of that sort. But that became a little frustrating from a professional standpoint. From a personal standpoint, it really started to impact me. Just seeing the pain, the suffering, the difficulties involved in family after family after family. It really became difficult for me to basically see the worst in human behaviors on a daily basis, and then to try and go home or to try and do something on the weekend and try to forget that or enjoy it. Secondly, or I should say additionally, an opportunity arose with McCormick, the law firm I'm at now, where I was speaking to a couple of their attorneys, and they said, you know, you can come with us, you can do some different type of work with us, you could help the community in another way. And I said, you know, this sounds good. Kind of a best case scenario for me. I'd still get my judicial benefits, insurance and things like that. I still get a pension of some sort. And I get to, in the waning part of my career, do some different things in terms of the practice of law. And it's a great established law firm, wonderful people, great attorneys. And I can also help in the, not so much with them, but kind of on my own, do some different things to help the community. I could do mediations and arbitrations. I could, I'm consulting with the district attorney's office now on some of their cases. I'm doing criminal, quote unquote, mediations or facilitations. Things I couldn't do as a judge. It's particularly appropriate now because of the pandemic, because the pandemic threw the whole system in disarray. It's so backed up, it's ridiculous. I can actually help the community more by processing these cases, by getting rid of these cases, by consulting, and by giving the participants the advantage of my experience. You can't do that as a judge. As a judge, you cannot try to resolve criminal cases because ultimately you may have to sentence. Now I can. So with the backlog, with the delay, with the opportunity, I said, why not?
But this isn't Judge Lovecchio giving up on the system. This is Judge Lovecchio returning to being a legal counsel, but also you're now in a position, am I correct, where you can take positions on issues that are important to you.
Right.
And you know, that's one of the reasons that we brought you on this show, and I'm sure we'll have you back.
Well, let me just give you a quick example. Yeah. There was an issue involving an attorney, involving the county, and whether there was an employment issue involving someone with one of the county agencies. As a judge, I could have never done anything about it. Well, I received a phone call, and then I communicated the information to the county who my law firm represents, and it's likely going to be resolved to everyone's benefit. And those are the kinds of things that I never could have done before. But given my status, for lack of a better word, as a retired judge, I still have the voice. And given my relationships that I kind of developed as a judge, I still know who to contact and how to resolve problems. So I actually think now, as a retired judge, I can address problems more effectively.
Judge, you obviously understand the criminal justice system inside and out. Do you believe that there is a need for fundamental criminal justice reform?
That's a good question. Yes, but I'm not sure if we can do it from the top down versus from the bottom up.
Because we've tried those things, and what ends up happening is our prisons get full.
Right. It was funny, years ago when they had the heroin task force, and I think it was Bald Eagle Nittany, I forget the name.
Oh,
of
yeah.
it. Okay. Yeah. Beth, I forget Beth's name. She's a professor over at Lock Haven, and she was kind of running the show. And she had asked me, she said, "What do you think?" And I gave her, give her 10 bullet points. And those bullet points still apply today. Pre-trial, or when people are arrested, our bail system is awful. We waste so much time and resources just locking people up. If we would just have, this is pre-trial. If we just had increased, Harry Rogers' bail services program by 10 people, the rewards, the economic rewards would come back 100-fold. We take people who can't afford bail.
And we're talking here about non-violent offenders.
Yes, yes. And the jail's filled with them. If we had them on a monitor, if we had them being supervised on a daily basis, if we had them going to address the problems that got them there, fine. We could do that if we had more pretrial services, but we don't. So they sit in there and they wait and wait and wait and wait on our dime. They don't get any better on our dime. They come to trial 2 years later, maybe, on our dime, when we could have been using all this time to address the problems while they got there.
You can get an associate's degree in 2 years.
Yes. People who have mental health issues, I get it. We had that one woman who went out and she broke all the windows all over the place. Well, clearly she has mental health issues. I think she's sitting in jail right now. And what's happening to address that? Nothing. I get it. People are mad, and people want want accountability. But what do you teach a mentally ill person to do while they're sitting in prison? Nothing, because they're mentally ill. You have to address that when you could address that pretrial through pretrial services. Then we also have this huge disparity in bail. I mean, you'd be in front of one MDJ and bail set at $200 million. That's an exaggeration. Right. But you're in front of another MDJ and bail set at 10,000. There's just this huge disparity of bail, and should we have some sort of system? Should we have a central bail officer? Maybe, so it's consistent. Should we have more pretrial services? Obviously. Then we look at how and the pandemic has just made it worse. There's no services in our prison at this point. If you get sent to the pre-release facility, you're not allowed to go to your job. Well, what does that do? So
Probably lose your job.
Right, because that's what we're doing. We're creating criminals by giving them no other choice. We're creating people who have no choice but to go out and steal. We can talk about it all day long. I used to run a morality or ethics class when I was teaching CCD at Mater Della Rosa, the if questions. And I'd ask people, well, would you have sex with that person for $1 million? And of course, these were all the strict Catholics, and they'll all be saying, no, of course not. No, 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 no. Then by the end of the class, they're like, I don't know. Because I'd be saying, well, you're married, you have 3 kids, your husband just died, and your youngest child needs a heart surgery. And you have
now the $1 million looks different to you.
Right. And so we forget, and I remember Judge Linhart said it once. He was trying a case. He was trying a first-degree homicide case, and he asked what I thought was a great question in voir dire, which was, do you believe people are a victim of their choices or their circumstances? Many of these people, it's both. And so how do we change that? And we don't at this point. Probation. And I was the administrative judge of our probation officer. Give us 10 more probation officers. Let them go out in the street. A lot of these people need life coaches. A lot of these people need someone to help them navigate what we take for granted. So if you had more probation officers, you have them out in the community, you have them helping these people. And I'm not asking for them not, or I'm not telling you that we don't make them accountable. Sure, they're accountable. But we forget that at some point the sentence ends. At some point the sanctions end. And unless they're in a better place than they were before, they're going to go back to the same place. That's why the recidivism rate is so high. I wanted to start a 24/7 program, which has remarkable success dealing with repeat DUI offenders, has remarkable success in other areas. All you needed was one additional probation officer and one additional pre-services, pre-release officer. If it was your second DUI and you were pulled over, you would immediately get put in front of a judge who would put you on a monitor to make sure whether you were drinking. And then you'd have to do A, B, and C with respect to treatment. If you got caught drinking, you got put in jail right away. And then once you were sentenced, you'd be sentenced to in-home detention instead of jail for 3 days or 14 days. It works remarkably well. But we ran into a problem because we didn't want to hire, not me, another probation officer and another pretrial services officer. We're penny wise and pound foolish.
Well, I think that now when you look at the polling, this is the first time really in American history that people who describe themselves as both conservative and liberal believe that too many people are in jail. When you look at the numbers in 1995 during the crime bill, the numbers were opposite. There was a belief that crime had gotten out of control, and the reason that it was out of control was that we weren't building enough prisons and locked them all up. But both on the Republican and Democrat, the numbers are very close. People who describe themselves as conservative and liberals believe that there needs to be criminal justice reform.
There absolutely does. And it's funny. I'm a registered Democrat, but I call myself a nominal Democrat. I'm a registered Democrat because my wife was a Democrat, and when you ran for judge, you had to join a party. Mm-hmm. So she goes, join the party. I said, okay. Didn't matter to me. But I'm very much in the middle. And when you're a judge, you can't have political leanings. You got to do what's right and what's fair. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with reducing crime.
Exactly.
And this has to do with saving money. We figured it out, the Chief Adult Probation Officer, Ed McCoy, and I, we figured it out. If you would have instituted my 24/7 program, our county would have saved $500,000 a year in terms of incarceration and everything else. And here's the other thing. Plus, you get the case resolved in a matter of months. Last but not least, there was an article out there called The Hardcore Prosecutor's Guide to Prosecuting DUI Offenses. That recommended a program like I was recommending. Why? Because it was 10 times more effective at stopping recidivism. People continue to drink and drive because they don't think they'll get caught. You put a guy on a monitor right away, they know they're getting caught if they drink.
Right. You
force them into treatment, they understand what's going on. If you got a DUI, for example, under our present system, you could go to an attorney, you could go to me, now I don't take criminal cases, but you could go to me if I was taking criminal cases, and I could say to you, I'll keep you out of jail for 18 months, if not 2 years. And then you'll go to jail for 2 days. And that entire time you continue to drink, no, there's really no difference. There's really no change. You have no motivation to change. And if someone like you went to jail for 2 days, really is under the radar, because you're not like many of them. If I put you on in-home detention, electronic monitoring, where you had a monitor that you had to carry around for 30 days, is probably going to be more effective because you're probably going to be a little more embarrassed. You're probably going to feel a little more regretful because this is for the world to see, not just you going some weekend at some prison 2 years later.
Right.
Yes, so we've got to do pretrial reforms. We have to do post-trial reforms in terms of reentry services, getting these and then supervision, so they don't come back. And then, you know, jail's an interesting concept. As I said, a lot of people need to go there. Do I think we rehabilitate people in jail? Absolutely not. I don't. I want to put them there so they don't hurt us, because there's some really bad people out there. But it's filled with people who don't necessarily need to be there. These nonviolent offenders who, if we did something different, and it's not coddling people, it's helping them change for us. If we don't, it's kind of like if we put people in jail and treat them like animals, or give them nothing to change and they get out, what do we really expect they're going to do? It's like that guy I told you about.
Right.
Don't worry, Judge. You don't have to tell me anything. I'm going to go do the same exact thing.
Right. I'm going to have two more questions, and then we're going to have you back. Again, I want to thank Phoebe Freer and the whole team here at North Central Pennsylvania.
And I'm sorry for talking too much.
No, that's okay. That's what this is all about. We're here. Folks are here to listen to you, not me. Our other two sponsors, of course, the firm that I'm the president of, Penn Strategies, which is providing municipal funding solutions for communities throughout Pennsylvania. You can visit us on the web at www.pennstrategiespa.com or check us out on Facebook. And we're always happy to speak with you about your community's needs or any other potential funding needs that you may have for volunteer organizations, etc. Our guest here on Pennsylvania Now is newly retired Judge Marc Lovecchio, and we have two more questions for the judge, but this has been an exciting program, and we look forward to having him back. Judge, the next to the last question is, do you think that a major part of the problem with crime is tied back to the heroin and opioid epidemic? And do you see that getting better or worse?
Much of it is tied to it. Much of it is tied to substance abuse, whether it be heroin or opiates, or now methamphetamine is on the rise, and we can't forget alcohol. Much of what I saw, a lot of domestic abuse, a lot of personal injury crimes were done with alcohol. And that's personal to me too, because I lost a brother from an opioid addiction. Yes, and there still is a large segment of society, I believe, that thinks that it's a moral failing, that thinks that you can just change. And the reality, and that's, I was the Pennsylvania judge who went to Reno for a 2-week training on this, where I was supposed to come back and teach the rest of the judges on this, and I actually started that process, and I'm going to still continue with that as a retired judge. We just still don't understand. There's still stigma associated with it. There's still this thought that you should be tough enough to overcome it, but the reality is it's a disease. The reality is that it impacts people's decision making. I can't tell you the amount of trauma and trouble, and I describe the epidemic as a hurricane, and it's just coming through societies and just wrecking everything, wrecking families, wrecking jobs, wrecking careers, and we have to. We're on our way. I think we're starting to treat it better. But it is, I think you hit the nail right on the head.
Final question, would you rule out any kind of future elected public service?
No, but it's interesting. Somebody
asked.
I
didn't ask if you were going to run, I asked if you'd rule it out.
No. I don't know whether I'd be any good at anything other than being a judge, though, to tell you the truth. I listen to some of our elected representatives. I listen to you. Sometimes even when we're just talking, I'm thinking, boy, these guys know a lot more than I do.
I can assure you, in this particular case, it's not true.
But somebody asked me that not too long ago, and I said, I don't know if I'd be any good at that, because these people have to know a lot about a lot. I think my career going forward is more as a consultant, based upon my experience trying to help people, and to use my voice and experiences to try and tell them what I think needs to be done to help.
Well, thank you very much again to Judge Lovecchio for joining us, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to listen to this program. And I want to just wish everyone a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year. We will be back with Pennsylvania Now, sponsored by Penn Strategies and the Clothier and some others, every 2 weeks. So we're going to try to do this program every 2 weeks, where we'll bring you, come into your homes or your smartphones, and bring you some local leaders in thought, and also some statewide leaders in thought. Of course, we have next year the gubernatorial primaries coming up for both the Republican and Democratic side, and we have the United States Senate. We're going to work to get some of the candidates to come on the program, as we have before, and also talking about non-political issues. But again, want to wish everybody a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays, and hopefully we'll have a very good 2022. Thanks for watching.